With Phase 4 of Season of Discovery about to drop, we're gonna see the biggest set of class changes so far. From the new runes, abilities being made baseline, runes being swapped about, and tons of class balancing. Whatever you played in Phase 3, it's going to look quite different now. In fact, outside of an actual expansion experience, classes have never changed as much as they are about to in Classic so far. So whatever your main is, there'll be something exciting to check out. You should also know all the runes that have been moved to skill books or skill books which were available from previous phases, such as the ones from dungeons that increased buff durations or redirect or anything like that, will now be available on vendors for a couple of gold each. These are from Milton Sheaf in Stormwind Library, just inside Stormwind Keep, or from Zor Lone Tree, who is where the shaman trainers are at in Orgrimmar, just next to Thrall. It's worth a note too that all the class changes are live in Season of Discovery right now. It's like Phase 4 has had a mini pre-patch, so you can get used to your new class a little bit, but today I want to cover a few of the classes and specs which I think are the most improved. Now this isn't specifically I think they're going to be doing the best damage or they'll be the best in PvP, but just that they've received the most updates from the phase, and they'll be the most changed and ultimately should be the most interesting to check out. So with all that said, let's make a start. We'll begin with rogues, and the first thing you should know is that Mutilate has been nerfed. I think it was a long time coming since this ability has been the center of every single rogue spec since Phase 2. But now in Phase 4, Mutilate will do less damage, as will Envenom. Alongside this, Blizzard have tried to buff other rogue identities to make them a bit more competitive, and the one I'm the most interested to see is definitely Dagger Rogues. So Slaughter from the Shadows has been updated. It now reduces the energy cost of backstab and ambush by 30, up from 20, and increases their damage against non-player targets by 60%. Alongside this, Shiv is gone and has been replaced with a new rune called Cutthroat. This makes it so you no longer need to be behind your target to backstab, ambush or garrote, and you have a 15% chance to make your next ambush not require stealth when backstabbing. It kind of goes without saying, but these two rune changes are absolutely enormous for Dagger Rogues, and I think whether you're leveling or indeed raiding, this build should see quite a bit of viability. I put together some kind of example build here, and when leveling I'll probably start off in combat and go down to Blade Flurry. I think Dagger Rogues are going to be basically unbeatable on 2 targets with this cooldown up, as they're just able to put out so much damage, on top of their other cooldowns and of course having Thistle Tea as well. I even went and tried this out on a rogue I haven't played for a while, and you can kind of see the results. It's pretty insane. I guess if pre-classics release you ever heard of the phrase front stabbing, well this gives it a whole new meaning. So if you've been a Dagger Rogue enjoyer, then it's going to be super viable at basically everything now. Tank Rogues have seen some updates too. Unfair Advantage will now trigger on parries and always hits your current target, and will grant 1 combo point when it triggers. Mangosh has also been updated as well, and will grant 100% parry chance until you parry an attack, and after you use this ability it will reduce the energy cost of Sinister Strike by 20 for the next 10 seconds. If you also have Sinister Strike talented, this means this ability will only cost 20 energy. So if you're a rogue tank that wants to focus on swords or just basically not daggers, then that's going to be a lot more viable in this patch. The next most interesting class I would say is Hunter, with both ranged and melee seeing a lot of updates. There have been some general changes too. All Hunter traps are usable in combat, you don't have to take Trap Launcher anymore, Heart of the Lion is now a skill book, and True Shot Aura no longer grants melee attack power and only grants ranged attack power, so you no longer have that feeling you need to go True Shot for your melee group. On top of that, the melee attack power that was previously granted by True Shot Aura is now on Heart of the Lion instead, so you're still getting this bonus. Lone Wolf has been buffed up considerably, and the damage bonus for not having a pet has been increased to 35%. This is going to be huge for ranged Hunter. For Melee Hunter, Cobra Slayer has been redesigned. Mongoose Bite will now have a chance to proc off your melee attacks, or when enemies dodge, and the longer it takes to proc, the higher chance it will have to do so, and it will scale with some of your attack power. So finally, this ability is worth putting on your bar. And Flanking Strike will now increase all damage done by 5% instead of just your Mongoose Bite and Raptor Strike, and it has a 33% chance to reset from your pet's basic attacks instead of Raptor Strike. So I hope you went and farmed your Broken Tooth, because that is going to be the best pet for this. Alternatively, when ZG comes out, there are some bats with the same attack speed, I believe, but we won't have that straight away. On top of that, certain talents in the marksmanship tree have been made so they will benefit melee as well, such as efficiency, reducing the mana costs, lethal shots increasing critical strike chance, and mortal shots which increase critical strike damage bonus. On top of that, if you're not into dual wielding as much, Blizzard have even tried to make two-handed hunter into more of a thing with a new rune called Wyvern Strike, which requires you to have gone all the way down to the bottom of the survival tree. So for hunter, whether you want to play ranged without a pet, ranged with a pet, melee with a pet, melee dual wield, or melee two-hander, Blizzard have tried to make every single one of these things work. Now, I imagine one of them will be better than the other, that tends to be how these things go, but it should be a lot of fun to experiment. Next up, we have the Warlock. I think they have seen quite a few interesting changes in Phase 4. We have a new spellbook which makes Spirit into a good stat amazingly. It's called Fell Armor, and it increases your spell damage and healing by a flat amount, plus additional spell damage and healing equal to 50% of your spirit, and you regain some of your health every 5 seconds. This is pretty similar to the version of Fell Armor that existed in Wrath of the Lich King, and will make Warlocks reconsider spirit when they're gearing, because 50% of spirit into spell damage is a pretty huge amount. Other than that, the Backdraft rune will no longer consume Immolate on the target, and the 30% haste buff has been buffed from a 10-second duration to 15, so this will really smooth out how destruction plays. Your Felguards had a lot of buffs, so if you take this rune it will feel worth using. In previous phases, Imp was still better than Felguard somehow. So now the Felguard has the Demonic Frenzy ability, causing their melee attacks to grant 5% additional attack power for 10 seconds, stacking 10 times. Pretty similar to the version they had in TBC actually. And the damage and stamina of Felguard have been increased by approximately 20%. So overall, if you pick Felguard, it should feel like a valuable demon to use. Lake of Fire has of course been redesigned and now causes Rain of Fire to be instant cast with no channeling time, but is on an 8-second cooldown. So this will make it so you can throw down your Rain of Fire and then run in and start channeling Hellfire. The Demonic Pact effect, which previously was only applied to your party, has been extended to be raid-wide instead, so you'll only need one Warlock with this. And I believe if you're playing a Destruction build, which I think you will be if you're raiding, then you're going to be taking this rune anyway. And the damage penalty of Shadow Bolt Volley has been reduced from 20% down to only 5%. I've wanted this rune to work so much so far in Season of Discovery, and I found that given tank threat, its place has been kind of niche. But we're going to hear more about tanks in a little bit, so I hope this will see more play. The next class I have is the Paladin, and I think this is the most changed class by far. So the Exorcist rune is now a baseline ability from a skill book, but it will only reduce the cooldown of Exorcism by 2 seconds when it procs instead of resetting it. Seal of Martyrdom is now also baseline and will be learned through a skill book. On top of that, you'll also be able to discover Avenging Wrath. This will increase damage and healing by 20% and gives you your iconic wings. Divine Steed will be another discovery made in Phase 4, increasing the Paladin's movement speed by 100% for 3 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. But the Paladin spec I think is the most improved is gonna be Holy. So Infusion of Light has seen several adjustments. It will now increase the damage and healing of Holy Shock by 50%, up from 20, and it will reduce its base cooldown to just 6 seconds. Beacon of Light will now last an hour, so you can throw it on a tank and they're good for the entire dungeon, and you have a new rune called Divine Light. This is a powerful and expensive heal, which will pretty much top anyone off that you use it on, and Holy's also received a rather curious new rune to keep the Shockadin theme going. I think this is going to end up being more of a PvP spec and it's not going to do damage in PvE, but it should be fun to try out and experiment with. This Shock and Awe rune makes it so when you use Holy Shock, the Paladin gains 1 additional spell power per point of intellect for 30 seconds on use. That is going to be a massive extra amount of spell power, and I can see certain builds basically being built around this rune. And the last class I want to mention is, well, not really a class, it's a role within the game, and that is for tanks. So all tanks now have an ability which hits up to 10 targets. Blizzard have done a bit of a 180 on the philosophy that tanks shouldn't be able to hold threat on everything, and that it's DPS players' job to watch their damage. I think this has happened because, well, they kept giving DPS tons of AoE and then tanks no AoE. And when you're a DPS player, you kind of just want to press your buttons, and it doesn't feel great when you're a tank and there's nothing you can do about somebody being reckless. So whether you think it's good or bad, this is changed now, and as a tank you're going to have a much easier time holding AoE threat. So for example, Thunderclap will hit 10 targets, and it has some attack power scaling, 5% I believe, better than nothing. Molten Blast will hit 10 targets, Shadow Cleave, the improved swipe rune, and so on. On top of that, tanks will either gain spell power or attack power from defense above the cap when using a certain ability. For example, a warrior would use Shield Slam and would get 4 points of attack power per point of defense above 300. So all in all, each tank gets bonus damage from going over the baseline defense cap of 300, which you wanted to do anyways to help with crushing blows and being crit and so on. So now when you see defense on an item as a tank, you don't think, oh yeah, well, I kind of have to get this. Now it's good for your defense and your offense. And of course, in vanilla, offense equals threat. So I think this is a great change which should help out tanks a bunch. But those are just a few of the class changes I have going into phase 4 of Season of Discovery. As I've mentioned a few times now, there really are so many class changes, and they are all live right now, so you can hop into the game and check them out in advance of the phase dropping. Let me know what you think of these changes and what you're looking forwards to playing in the comments down below, and as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.